Have you ever wondered about the underhanded betrayal that would cost Hitler WWII? In the early stages of the Second World War, an uneasy alliance formed between two of history's most notorious leaders, Adolf Hitler of Germany and Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union. This alliance, however, was far from a friendship. It was more like a high-stakes poker game, where each player eyed the other with a deep-rooted suspicion, holding their cards close to their chest. From the start, the relationship between Hitler and Stalin was marked by tension and mistrust. Both leaders were astute strategists, yet their ideologies were worlds apart. Hitler, the fascist, believed in racial superiority and the expansion of German living space. Stalin, the communist, sought to spread his ideology worldwide, but was primarily concerned with securing the Soviet Union's borders. Their ambitions were fundamentally incompatible, yet circumstances forced them into a fragile alliance. Each leader in their own right was a master of deception, constantly trying to outmaneuver the other. Hitler, with his aggressive expansionist policies, kept Stalin on his toes, while Stalin, ever the pragmatist, played a delicate balancing act, trying to avoid direct confrontation with Germany while preparing for an inevitable conflict. But beneath this veneer of cooperation, each was planning their own strategies, waiting for the right moment to strike. Hitler, ever the opportunist, saw in Stalin a potential threat that needed to be neutralized. Stalin, on the other hand, was wary of Hitler's intentions but was caught in a precarious position, needing to buy time to build up the Soviet Union's military strength. And so, the stage was set for one of the most dramatic betrayals in history, a betrayal that would not only alter the course of the Second World War, but also set the stage for the Cold War, a conflict that would divide the world into two opposing blocs for nearly half a century. This was the beginning of a relationship doomed to fail. In 1939, Hitler and Stalin shocked the world by signing a Non-aggression Pact. This pact, formerly known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, was an agreement between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union that they would not engage in military action against each other for the next 10 years. But why would these two fierce dictators, who were ideologically opposed, decide to form such an alliance? Well, the motivations were twofold. For Hitler, it was a strategic move. His primary objective at the time was to invade Poland without interference from the Soviets. For Stalin, an alliance with Germany served as a buffer against Western threats and gave the Soviet Union time to build up its military strength. The pact outlined not only non-aggression, but also included protocols for the division of territories in Eastern Europe. Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Finland, and Romania were all divided up like pieces on a chessboard. This secret clause would later serve as a catalyst for the invasion of Poland, marking the start of World War II. The international community received the news of this pact with skepticism and disbelief. Many saw it as a temporary truce, a pause before the inevitable clash of these two titans, and they weren't wrong. The pact was a facade, a strategic maneuver on the chessboard of world politics, with both leaders fully aware that their agreement was merely a stalling tactic. This pact was a pivotal moment in history, a harbinger of the horrors that were to come. It served as an example of how political alliances can be used as strategic tools, how they can be forged and broken as easily as a promise, and how they can lead to unexpected and catastrophic consequences. And so, in August 1939, with the stroke of a pen, two of the most powerful men in the world made an agreement that would shape the course of history. It was a pact that was meant to prevent war, but instead it did the exact opposite. Yet, this agreement was not destined to last. In 1941, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, a surprise attack on the Soviet Union. This operation, named after the medieval German Emperor Frederick Barbarossa, was Hitler's bold and audacious plan. It was a full-scale invasion of the Soviet Union, the largest military operation in human history in terms of manpower and area coverage. Let's delve into the details. Operation Barbarossa was an assault of unprecedented scale. Over 3 million German soldiers, along with more than 500,000 from Germany's allies, were mobilized for this operation. They were divided into 3 strategic groups aiming for key cities: Leningrad, Moscow, and Kiev. Hitler's intention was nothing short of complete and swift victory. But why the Soviet Union? Hitler saw Bolshevism as a significant threat to Germany. He believed that by defeating the Soviet Union, he could secure Germany's eastern frontier, gain control of Soviet resources, and finally have the upper hand in the war. Stalin, on the other hand, was taken aback. Despite warnings from his intelligence and the evident buildup of German troops at the border, he was caught off guard. The invasion began on June 22, 1941, and the Soviet Union found itself under attack from the west. This was a blatant betrayal. Only 2 years prior in 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union had signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression agreement. Hitler's decision to invade the Soviet Union marked a dramatic U-turn from this pact. The operation, while initially successful, marked the beginning of a bitter and brutal conflict on the Eastern Front. Operation Barbarossa was a ruthless strategy, a gamble that Hitler hoped would bring him closer to winning the war. However, it was a gamble that would not pay off. The harsh winter, the resilient Soviet resistance, and the vastness of the Soviet territory were factors Hitler had underestimated. This betrayal would have far-reaching consequences. Operation Barbarossa not only marked the beginning of the end for Hitler's ambitions, but it also set the stage for the Cold War, shaping the geopolitical landscape for the decades that followed. Stalin, despite being caught off guard, was not going to take this lying down. In the wake of Operation Barbarossa, the Soviet Union found itself suddenly, brutally invaded. The initial response was one of shock and disarray, yet this did not mean defeat. In fact, it was quite the opposite. Stalin, a man known for his iron will and ruthless determination, was not about to let Hitler's betrayal go unanswered. The Soviets, despite being initially overwhelmed, soon displayed an incredible resilience that would come to define their response. They fought fiercely, holding their ground against the German onslaught. The Red Army, though initially outmatched in terms of technology and tactical prowess, began to adapt and learn from their mistakes. They stiffened their defenses, made strategic retreats, and prepared for the long, grueling battle that lay ahead. Stalin, meanwhile, rallied his people with fiery speeches, calling upon the spirit of Mother Russia to resist the fascist invaders. He reminded them of their proud history, of the strength and courage that ran through their veins. He promised them victory and vengeance, and the people listened. The Soviet Union, under Stalin's iron-fisted rule, began to mobilize its vast resources. Factories, mines, and farms worked around the clock, producing the tanks, guns, and ammunition that the Red Army needed. Millions of men and women were drafted into the military, ready to lay down their lives for their motherland. And then, the counteroffensive began. In the bitter cold of winter, when the German forces were at their weakest, the Red Army launched a series of devastating attacks. They pushed back the invaders, reclaimed lost territory, and began to turn the tide of the war. The Soviet response was not just a military one, it was a testament to the indomitable spirit of a nation, a people who refused to be conquered, who rose from the ashes of betrayal to fight back with everything they had. Hitler's betrayal had awakened a sleeping giant. The Battle of Stalingrad was a turning point in the war. This massive engagement on the Eastern Front, fought between August 1942 and February 1943, was a titanic clash of wills, strategies, and ideologies. Stalingrad was more than just a city to Hitler and Stalin. It was a symbol, an embodiment of their respective dictatorial power and national pride. For Hitler, capturing Stalingrad was meant to crush Soviet morale and secure Germany's eastern flank. For Stalin, defending the city named after him was a matter of national survival and personal prestige. The battle saw some of the most intense urban warfare in history. Soldiers fought house to house, room to room, in conditions that were often brutally cold and always pitiless. The German Sixth Army, once considered invincible, was systematically ground down by the relentless Soviet forces. It was the Soviet strategy of kotel, or encirclement, that ultimately spelled doom for the German forces. In November 1942, the Soviets launched Operation Uranus, a massive counteroffensive that encircled the German Sixth Army and parts of the Fourth Panzer Army. Cut off from supplies and reinforcements, the German forces were left in a dire predicament. Despite desperate pleas from his generals, Hitler refused to allow the trapped forces to attempt a breakout. Instead, he ordered them to stand and fight. This decision would prove catastrophic. By February 1943, the German forces, starved and depleted, surrendered. The Battle of Stalingrad was not just a military defeat for Hitler, it was a psychological blow shattering the myth of German invincibility. It marked a shift in momentum, with the Soviet Union now taking the offensive. The battle was a testament to the tenacity and resilience of the Soviet people and their Red Army. It signaled to the world that the tide of the war was turning. From that point onwards, the German war machine was largely on the defensive. The dream of a swift victory in the East had turned into a nightmare of attrition and defeat. Hitler's dream of conquering the Soviet Union was slipping away. Hitler's betrayal had cost him dearly. The price of such a deceit was high, and it was paid in the currency of lives, resources, and strategic positioning. Firstly, let's talk about the human cost. Millions of soldiers were thrown into a war they were ill-prepared for. The Eastern Front became a quagmire, draining the Wehrmacht of its manpower. The well-disciplined, well-equipped German army was slowly whittled away in the bitter cold of the Russian winter and in the face of the relentless Soviet resistance. Then came the depletion of resources. War is a machine that feeds on the lifeblood of a nation, its resources. Germany, already stretched thin by conflicts on multiple fronts, found its reserves running dangerously low. As the war dragged on, Hitler's decision to betray the Non-aggression Pact strained Germany to its breaking point. Fuel, food, ammunition, the vital cogs in the war machine, dwindled, slowing the German advance to a crawl and leaving the troops vulnerable. Lastly, there was the loss of strategic position. By turning his gaze from the Western Front to open a new front in the East, Hitler had spread his forces too thin. This strategic blunder allowed the Allied forces to gain ground, opening the door for the D-Day invasion and ultimately, the fall of the Third Reich. The cost of Hitler's betrayal was not just measured in the immediate aftermath of his decision to invade the Soviet Union. Its effects rippled outwards, shaping the course of the war and the future of the world. Hitler, in his hubris, had thought he could outsmart his enemies, that he could play them off against each other, but in the end, it was he who was outplayed. His underhanded tactics had backfired spectacularly. The cost of betrayal was high, and it was a price that Hitler and the world would pay for years to come. His underhanded tactics had backfired spectacularly. In 1945, the Third Reich fell. The final year of World War II was a tumultuous period marked by desperate battles, shifting alliances, and the inexorable march of fate. As the Allied forces closed in, Germany found itself on the brink of collapse, its dreams of world domination shattered. Hitler's once mighty Third Reich was now a crumbling edifice, its foundations eroded by the weight of its own ambitions. The Eastern Front, once a symbol of German military prowess, was now a quagmire of defeat and despair. The Soviet Red Army, fueled by a burning desire for retribution, pressed relentlessly towards the heart of Hitler's empire, Berlin. Berlin, the capital of the Third Reich, became a battleground. Its once grand boulevards and majestic buildings were reduced to rubble as the city braced for the final onslaught. The Red Army's assault was ferocious, their resolve unyielding. The once invincible Wehrmacht found itself outmatched and outmaneuvered, its soldiers fighting not for victory, but for survival. And at the center of this maelstrom was Adolf Hitler. The man who had once held the world in his grasp was now a shadow of his former self. His dreams of a 1,000-year Reich turned to dust. As his empire crumbled around him, Hitler made the fateful decision to end his own life. On April 30th, in a bunker beneath the Chancellery, Hitler committed suicide, effectively ending his reign and signaling the imminent fall of the Third Reich. But this was more than just the end of a regime. It was the end of an ideology that had plunged the world into the darkest period of its history. The fall of the Third Reich marked a turning point in human history, a moment of profound change that would reshape the world in ways that are still being felt today. The underhanded betrayal that cost Hitler the war had also cost him his life. It was a fitting end to a tragic chapter in human history, a stark reminder of the price of ambition and the cost of betrayal. The war was over, but its impact was far from finished. The echoes of the conflict that had ravaged the world for 6 long years were still reverberating, shaping the New World Order. The end of the Second World War marked the beginning of a new era. The Axis powers had been defeated, but the world was left in tatters. With the fall of the Third Reich, Germany was a nation divided. The victorious Allies, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union, each took control of a portion of the country, turning it into a patchwork of occupation zones. This division of Germany was not just a geographical one, it was a division of ideologies, a division that would lay the groundwork for the decades-long conflict that was to come. The Cold War. The Western Allies and the Soviet Union, once united against a common enemy, now found themselves on opposing sides. The Iron Curtain had descended across Europe, with Germany, and particularly its capital Berlin, at its heart. The aftermath of the war also saw the rise of two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. The power dynamics of the world had shifted. The age of empires was over. The age of superpowers had begun. Germany, the instigator of the war, was left a shattered nation. But from the ashes it would rise again, eventually becoming a beacon of democracy and prosperity in Western Europe. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, would use its victory to expand its sphere of influence, spreading communism throughout Eastern Europe. In the end, the betrayal that cost Hitler the war had far-reaching consequences. It was not just a military defeat for Nazi Germany, but a catalyst for a seismic shift in the world order. It paved the way for a new kind of conflict, one fought not with bullets and bombs, but with ideologies and influence. The betrayal that cost Hitler the war had reshaped the world. So, to answer our opening question, throughout history it's clear that decisions driven by deceit have a way of backfiring. The story of Hitler's betrayal of Stalin during World War II is a prime example. We started with the beginnings of the Cold War, where the seeds of distrust were sown. It was a time of tension, a prelude to the drama that would unfold on the global stage. We then discussed the Non-aggression Pact, a carefully crafted document of deceit. This pact was a promise of peace between two giants, Hitler and Stalin. But it was a promise made to be broken, a calculated move by Hitler to buy time and secure his Western front. Then came Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's surprise attack on the Soviet Union. This was the ultimate betrayal, a flagrant violation of the Non-aggression Pact. It was an audacious move, a gamble that Hitler hoped would bring him victory. In response, the Soviet Union retaliated with a fury that Hitler hadn't anticipated. The Soviet resilience and their resolve to protect their homeland played a significant role in turning the tide of the war. Their counterattacks proved to be a turning point, a clear demonstration that Hitler's betrayal was a costly mistake. The cost of this betrayal was immense. It not only turned a potential ally into a formidable foe, but also stretched the German forces thin, leading to their eventual downfall. The fall of the Third Reich was inevitable, a consequence of Hitler's short-sighted strategy. In the aftermath, the world was left to pick up the pieces. The world had changed irrevocably, and the echoes of this betrayal still resonate today. The underhanded betrayal that would cost Hitler WWII was a lesson in the dangers of deceit and the unpredictability of war. It highlights the importance of trust and honesty in international relations and the dire consequences when these principles are disregarded. A lesson that, one hopes, has been well learned.